I'm Claude Dern, logging contractor and Vermont Forest landowner. Our program, Forests, Vermont's Golden Resource, is to bring an awareness to people of what occurs in everyone's backyard, the forest. There are many unknowns in the forest to many people, and we hope through a variety of programs to bring an awareness of the enjoyment there is in the forest and its impact on Vermont's economy. The forests have the water, streams that stay cool to feed the lakes, ponds, are an important resource of fish, sports fish, both summer and winter. Well, if each swirl of branches represents a year, I'd say roughly 75 years. And all these trees, regardless of size, are about the same age.
About the same age, yeah. Whatever the land use was, it changed about 75 years ago, I guess. Kind of dramatically to get white pine in.
Yes. Certainly wouldn't know that this was open field before long.
Wow, what's here, Claude?
Oh, we were just thinking of some forest products, and this is Jim White, Bennington County Forester, and we've talked over the years many times about different things that happen in the forest and products, and historical products and products of today, and hopefully a lot of products in the future. Maybe we'll look at some of these. We have some of the oldest products, some of the historical things. The first uses of the forest were some charcoal, potash, lye, tannin. And we'll be talking about these things in later programs. Charcoal used for heat, smelting iron, very lightweight to transport once it was like that. A lot of the soaps, lye, things in the soap. Those are some of the older products. Here's the remains of a wooden sap bucket. Everyone's familiar with the maple syrup industry. Been very popular.
Claude, maybe I should say the first products of the forest served a dual purpose since the early settlers in the 16 and 1700s were farming of some kind, whether it was, I guess it was more sheep than anything, but even their crops, the forest had to be removed. So by removing the trees and then burning them, they had a product which would to trade with for their whatever they couldn't make, the products they needed. So removing the forest was, well, I guess we would call it devastation today, but it came back. It's resilient.
So kind of necessity, and killed two birds with one stone.
Yep.
Some of the forest products that everyone's familiar with. Paper, many different kinds of papers. A lot of this is using the poor grade material that used to lots of times stay in the woods. It was not marketable. Some of the more elaborate forest products that are manufactured today It's an archery bow made out of laminated wood. It's quite a high finish on it.
Another laminated product, of course.
Oh yeah, the gun stock, similar type process.
And those are both from?
This is from Rutland Plywood. Rutland, Vermont. They're a large employer in the area. Do a lot with wood products. If we walk along farther, Jim, maybe this could assist you. And you have a compass.
I'm not
on
that
the,
old yet, huh?
Have a compass on the
So
top.
don't get lost.
You
huh?
get lost.
Yeah. Claude, you skipped over our most famous forest product, known the world around.
The maple syrup. Picture on the can even shows years ago with horses, and the new technology today really hasn't changed this process very much at all. The Indians, they used to make maple syrup. They didn't boil the way we did today because they didn't have a pan to put over their fire, so they hollowed out a huge, usually pine tree, filled it with sap, heated the stones in an open fire and threw the stones in, and it would evaporate until they got down to the maple syrup. It's a little bit more cumbersome than it is today.
I saw that done, Claude, and you wouldn't believe how black it becomes. All the carbon off the rocks washes out into the sap before it turns into syrup. And
That'd be the Vermont grade double X
anyway,
amber.
yeah. And they didn't stop really at syrup because they didn't have any way to keep the liquid, so they used to boil it down further to make sugar.
Sugar.
Yeah.
It would keep longer. Some of the other products, a lot of these are from J.K. Adams in Dorset. The wooden rolling pin. Wooden train whistle. The wooden bowls, this is probably from Granville Manufacturing in Granville, Vermont. The characteristics of wood drying and things show how uneven it is. What kind of wood do you think that is?
Say that's a maple.
It's maple? Here's a maple bowl.
That's a nice finish on there, isn't it?
Very high gloss finish, very light, thin. This is a wooden top. Here's a ladle, wild cherry spoon. Nice grain design to it. A wooden ball. J.K. Adams is noted for its butcher block cutting boards. This is a miniature butcher block table. Wooden baskets. Many sizes, shapes, uses. Some wooden toys. Decorative little jewelry box, dovetail joints. Many of these are done in puzzle form. A tape measure. What would you say?
It's got a defect in the wood, Claude. It's a defect that makes it very valuable. These little pock marks are called bird's eyes. And bird's eye maple, a lot of it from Vermont is known worldwide too to craftsmen around the world. Highly prized and highly valued.
But in the ordinary lumber market, that is considered a defect. It is not
yeah.
usable.
What do you have that bottle of wine for, Claude?
Well, it's just wondering what to do with it, and maybe you can display it in a different manner here. I don't
Looks
know
like
if
you didn't get all the parts of the wine rack there, did you?
Well, it's just one piece of wood, that's all.
Can you make a wine rack out of that?
I think so. We'll just stand this up and, well, we'll stand it up and, we'll stand up.
You didn't get all the parts.
Oh, maybe we'll just put the bottle in it there, and that solved that.
Now the magicians have to go like this, Claude, to make sure there's no wire and cloth or string around to hold that up. Clever.
It seems to stay there. Another J.K. Adams product. Jim, can you explain the marking of the logo of J.K.
Sure.
Adams?
This is J.K. Adams' logo, but it was first used almost, well, over 300 years ago. This was called the broad arrow, and it was the king's way of the English of marking trees, white pines like the grove we're in now, to reserve those for ship masts. The sailing ships were made Britain a world power, and they had to have the masts for those ships to travel across the oceans, and white pine was the best wood, and we had it here and they didn't have it. So they reserved those for the King of England, and the early settlers really didn't take too kindly to this, to somebody come through and mark their tree with this broad arrow and say this belongs to the King of England when they were born in this country. The way Vermonters are today, I'm sure they were a little bit more then, that they took offense to that. So it was one of the reasons why we had a Revolutionary War, was the taking of these trees from the settlers.
Very interesting. Here's another laminated wood product. Not very good.
I told you I should have practiced.
Okay.
No, I'm all set.
And there's another one. Those are from Rutland plywood. What time's they getting to be, Jim?
Well, it's kind of a 3 o'clock. This is made by Johnny Williamson from North Bennington on State Line Farm. Very handy fellow, and I think we're going to be visiting him in future shows.
I'll have a seat here in one of a telescope director's chairs. Been around for many years. There's quite a history behind telescope, and I'm sure that we will visit their plant sometime. This is a table, and we have something over here that the umbrella. You have the covering that goes on it. Telescope is well known for its patio furniture. Another real unique wood product. This is a wooden hat. This is made from a red maple burl by Ennis Michelson in Manchester. Jim, you don't seem to have a hat.
I'm not a hat guy. Nobody would believe how comfortable a wooden hat is. They think it's be sharp, and I don't want to do an ad for Hennis, but I couldn't believe when somebody told me there was a fellow up in Manchester making wooden hats, that I thought it'd be something heavy and uncomfortable with square corners, I guess. And this is so nice and comfortable with how round it is on the inside.
Would you estimate the weight? A couple ounces?
Sure, that's all.
It's feather-like.
Yeah. He makes them in a couple different styles. I guess we can tell people about how much they cost. A hat this size is just $700.
I believe custom made.
Yeah. You send him your hat size, and he has, doesn't he have 5 or 6 styles to pick from?
I believe so.
Abraham Lincoln stovepipe hats, the Greek sailors hats, the cowboy hats. I'm going to put this back in the box, because we don't want to buy it.
Jim, could I interest you in some food?
Food from the forest.
Food from the forest.
Okay, shoot, go.
Many food. Some of the better known fiddlehead ferns.
You know, my father always said about fiddleheads and dandelions, if they were any good, they'd sell them in the Grand Union, and by God, they are now. So
Here's a jack in the pulpit. The bottom part of the stem is edible. However, if eaten raw, it's as bad as any habanero pepper. But when dried in the sun, it becomes a good snack and is also used for flour. Just one of many, many items that we'll be covering in the future, some of the edibles. Jim, would you care for some tea?
I've been waiting for it.
Okay, we'll have some pine tea today. Sometimes we have hemlock or spruce tea. From the birches, many, many different.
I've never had this before, Claude.
So we just put in this boiling water. Yes, it's boiling. And let that steep
For how
a few
long?
minutes.
A few minutes.
Or if you want to have more ascorbic acid, you can let it steep all night.
Okay.
And it's a very flavorful, delightful
We'll
drink.
come back to this.
Well, we've gone through many of our forest products. Maybe we should take our hiking stick and continue along through the forest and see what other
Okay.
items we can find.
We gotta come. What I'd like to talk about now is the forest as a resource, the trees, that part of the forest, the trees. In school, I think everybody learned about resources of the world, and I want to show you a few here. Coal is a resource, oil is a resource, and trees are a resource. Now, trees differ from coal and oil in one thing, that trees are a renewable resource, and the other products aren't. Coal and oil are not renewable resource. Every ton of coal we take out of the ground and burn up is one less ton of coal on Earth. Every quart of oil we take out of the ground and use is one less quart of oil on Earth. Trees differ in that they're renewable. We can take this tree behind me right here, let it stand. We can either cut it or let it die. There'll be, as soon as it is not occupying that space anymore, there'll be all this undergrowth will grow up to take its place. So forests grow, and in another part of the show you're going to see how a tree grows in height. Now I'd like to tell you about the change in Vermont, the change in land use over the years, taken in Shaftesbury, Vermont, just east of here. This is the East Road right here, going north. And I'm going to show you a new photograph from 1990 and show you the difference in land use between 1942 and 90. And in fact, if we had pictures from 1842, we would see more of a drastic change. Okay, we have this road triangle right here. Another thing I'd like to point out is this is a power line, a large transmission line running from Bennington to Arlington. Okay, just to the east of the East Road, you'll see a lot of old rectangles right here. Those are small agricultural fields, which was the norm throughout Vermont for almost 100 years. And you can see field after field. These are the hedgerows that are showing up, and there will be a stone wall there. Field after field. There's probably 30 small fields right in here, probably 4 or 5 acres apiece. Okay, now we're going to go almost 50 years later, to 1990. A little bit different scale. And here's our triangle today. Right there. The road triangle's still the same. Here's our power line east of the road, and all of a sudden, as soon as in the northeast we don't have to plant trees like they do in many places of the world, as soon as you stop mowing, stop pasturing what was once forest land, the forest is going to reclaim it. In fact, that's what's been happening since about 1830, when Vermont had probably the most farmland that we've ever had, the most open land. We had 80% of our forests were cleared for agricultural uses, mostly for sheep pasturing, but some of the lower lands for cropland. And as the economy changed, as the western land, which was richer, easier to work, and farming techniques changed where every farmer could grow more crops than for just themselves. The poorer land in the east and the harsher climates like Vermont, the land was abandoned, and immediately after it's abandoned, the forest is right there to reclaim it.
Jim,
Yep.
what's taking you so long? Oh, history. There's a lot of history. Look what I just found.
You just found that?
Wow, there must have been a hunter around here at one time.
It's an old weapon.
Been around for a while.
Yeah.
Let's get going. There's
Okay.
much more to see.
Okay.
Jim, look at this. Suppose this was the gentleman that the hunter was after? Been here a good many years. Would have been a nice trophy in its day. Still a very important use of our forests. All the wildlife, the game. Jim. Jim. Where'd you go, Jim? What am I picking here? Jim must be off looking at trees. Maybe this would help me identify. So many different kinds. Flowers throughout the forest bring many different insects, butterflies. These are a food source for our birds. Up higher, the bird colonies, the nests. See, not all these nests are in the air. Some are in the ground. What do these birds look like? Wild duck. Hummingbird. Hummingbird, 2,000 RPMs, eats 3.5 times its weight in a day. Busy little critter. Some of the insects that they eat. You don't see the mosquito there. I eat a lot of garlic. They don't bother me too much. Hey, Jim, getting close to lunch. Here's some food. Wonder if these are good to eat. Got to be pretty careful here. Doesn't look like it's one of those. Have to be very careful here. It's edible and what isn't. Many other edibles. We'll be talking about these things at a later time. Many animals, some are seen often, some are seen on the edges of the forest, some only deep in the forest. Mountain lion, cougar, supposedly still in Vermont. So very, very seldom seen. Some of the paw prints, the tracks that these animals make. Identification in the winter on soft ground. Well, Jim, I don't know where you are. Maybe you're ahead of me. There's a big tree up here. Jim, look. This is an old sap house, I think. Some stove somebody discarded. An old stove. How interesting. What Wait a minute, what's happening here? Somebody's coming, something's coming. Is this an earthquake? The Paul Bunyan legend supposedly had its beginning during the Papineau Rebellion of 1837 in Canada. This Paul Bunyan was a mighty muscled, warlike, bearded giant who had many successful slaughters of the Queen's troops. Later, Paul Bunyan ran a logging camp. In the autumn, the loggers went to the woods, forcing their way up swift rivers in bateaux. Every trip had many portages around rapids. Snow and ice then isolated them in camps for 5 to 6 months. The workday was dawn to dusk. The loggers survived on beans, salt pork, and sourdough bread. At night, there were songs and tales around the bunkhouse stove. The camp boss was like a chief of a tribe. His will had to be the law, and he had to have exceptional strength and courage to enforce it. After his part in the Papineau Rebellion, there was no more famous camp boss than Paul Bunyan. American loggers below the border made Paul Bunyan a true hero of camp night's entertainment. They gave him Babe, the blue ox, who measured 42 axe handles and a plug of chewing tobacco between the horns. They created the marvelous mythical logging camp with its cookhouse of mountainous size and history of Olympian feats, and they populated this camp with astounding minor heroes. Paul Bunyan became an inventor, orator, and industrialist as never existed before. Paul Bunyan led American loggers from the winter of the blue snow until the spring that the rain came up from China. And so the Paul Bunyan legend grew up in shanties, around the hot stoves of winter. We have a contest for those of you that have followed us along today. The question is, when did Vermont have the most forested land? 1796, 1896, or 1996? We will show you an address that you can send your response to before July 1st and receive a Smokey the Bear prize and recognition on our next show. Our contest address is Jim White, RR1, Box 265A, Shaftesbury, Vermont, 05262. What do we have here? In the middle of the forest. Railroad. Railroads were used a lot to transport the forest products, the logs. There were logging railroads. In the Live Brook Wilderness area, where man has never been, some people think, the most common access is up the old railroad grade. That'll be covered in detail some future date. Jim.
Yeah, hi Claude.
There you are. Where have you been?
Well, I've been getting ready for our next show.
What have you been doing?
Previewing the site. Well, you'll have to tune in and see yourself.
Well, oh,
In another month.
we're coming out of the forest. Been a long day.
Yeah.
An interesting day.
Yes.
And here's one of our posters. You can tell the people where we can get these.
U.S. Forest Service office in Manchester Center on Route 11 and 30. And especially teachers. They're good for classroom for teaching purposes. So I'd encourage at least the teachers to.
Okay.
So
Thank you for
see you next month,
for the trip. Not sure where you were part of the time, but we'll see you next month.
Okay.